Hi, I'm Sven. First thing I'd like to say is that I came and did this assembly thing in Auckland many years ago, and it reminded me how much fun it was and eventually got me into doing this. So to all of you who organize this and all of you who attend to make sure that they do it every year, thank you very much. It's brilliant. It's a wonderful way to remind some of us that we can do more. I think my demo is defective looking at this because half the stuff hasn't started, so it doesn't matter. Okay, so in my day job, I'm a DevOps. I have done all sorts of software things. I don't do hardware. My last hardware before all of this was my thesis. And then somewhere, because of these things, somebody who knows me from Woodford or knows me via a friend of a friend roped us into building hardware for theatre. And I'm not going to cover all of it, but over the last 2 years, we've done 4 shows, and it's been great fun. And what I was going to try to talk about is the exact opposite of what all the rest of the talks are, in that I want to remind you this is so much easier than you think it is, so long as you over-provision. So Mark and Tish talked about the SP32 being too small and being a pain. For all of my purposes, it's massive. And so, yeah, hopefully I'll cover that in a way that makes sense. Okay, so the worst thing about this is I now have a new hobby. And the hobby is to add distributed tiny things that prop designers can then build into something. One of the props that I wish was working is this thing here. It's got an SP8266 in it and some neopixels, and then we put a UHF, an NFC thing on it. So when we put it on the reader, it glows, and we get a sound effect. But it looks, to all intents and purposes, like, let's just see if I can boot this. Maybe later it'll work. I simply don't have enough power here. Okay. All right. So we've done 4 things. One of the first thing was a thing at Museum of Brisbane where we used 6 Raspberry Pis, NFC readers, and then a whole pile of props. And the whole point of the show, from my perspective, was to create some really simple things that you put on these readers that then trigger audio. And the only trick was that it had to work without me being there, and it did. So for 4 months, the actors rolled out this entire set, put it all together, plugged it in, and did their show for an hour. Then they packed it all away, and then I brought it back out again. And they did 4 shows a weekend, and then a whole pile of shows during the week. And I think the reason it worked was because what I did was use what we do in large-scale websites where we have microservice-type architectures, so everything was as simple and as stupid as it could be. Because it was a rush job for me, I think most of the code was essentially the demo code for whatever device I was using, wrapped in a little bit more Python to do MQTT. And so, if we're lucky, you get that, which, from the perspective of your average punter, is magic. And, no, wait. Yeah, no, it's magic for me too. You know, it's one of those really horrid curses where while you're building this, it becomes boring and simple and trivial. And then when you see an actor sell the story and do this thing, it's just like, wow. And then Woodford was a wonderful project in 2018. I turned up, nothing worked, and we tried to get dueling working. And I don't know, I may have forgotten to give us photos. And then we did another show this year, and then finally Woodford, which is this year's show, which I've got most of the photos for. This is what the prop people built in the whole month before Woodford. So all of December, they built this large area, about this sort of, front of the room size set, into which they placed, professional lighting and sound and smoke machines that we had to control, and also actuators using these simple little ESP8266s which then used MQTT. And so this thing here is literally just pinging the bus, asking for, is the button pushed? And when it is, it sends out an MQTT message. And that is all it does. And that's what I mean by this thing is way overpowered for the purpose. But I think, let's just ignore the backboard. That's $7 worth of stuff. If you were doing large amounts, I'm sure you'd care. But in my case, that was perfect. It doesn't take any time. And then, not only does this prop get built by volunteers in a month without me being there, because I have a day job, but then they get some volunteers who've never seen this stuff before to build all of the interactions. So they, find an RFID tag that they've attached to something, and on one of the mini readers, it triggers something.
No,
that's some audio that comes from the Museum of Brisbane show, where the podiums, we had 6 of them, have different personalities, and the actors play to that and riff off it to add to the experience. To my surprise, this year, we had 2 volunteers who basically created the entire show. I haven't looked into how the node red's done yet. It worked, and I don't care. They wrote the interfacing to the DMX and then the entire control system effectively for this. All I did was put together the devices that then they could use. This is the beastie that, for me, saves me lots of time and money. Although I noticed that I think I paid $5 for each one, $5 a pop for each of these, and I've got, 30, 40 of them. But then you've got the SP32 version that's $4 a pop. Yeah. Considering that in the 90s we used to buy something this powerful for hundreds of dollars and be scared of breaking it, it's just frighteningly awesome. And then from Aliexpress, again, you get a whole stack of shields that allow us to quickly prototype stuff out. And I get the feeling that, the power, the DC power one is your board, that they've just swiped and... Yeah, and it looks suspiciously the same as the one they sell, just in a different color. Which is, from our perspective, really awesome, because we don't have to think very hard. We just get a stack of them. If we break one, we don't care. Yep, this is that typical thing of, I needed some things. Not very many. And they're easy to program if you don't look under the hood. Whatever you do, don't look under the hood. You end up with what Mark did and finding out how all the memory allocation goes, and it's just, I don't want to know. I think almost all of my code looks pretty much like the examples plus a bit of MQTT, because when the theatre producers or the actors come to me, they basically go, so we've got a performance tomorrow. We want to do this. And I'm like, okay, so here. And this is also why I pretty much make it so that each one of these does one thing and one thing only. Okay. So here we go. We have, the Neopixel thing. And that turns into some glowing mushrooms. And to me, that's the standout prop of this year, where we just have this lovely ability to change colors. He says, I'm going to risk it. So we get these lovely purples and things like that. And, it's amazingly simple. Yeah. Yes?
Are you powering right now your ESP266 from USB?
No. So this one's powered from USB because I've reduced the brightness down to, 1/3.
The old tip is, like laptops nowadays can give you 2 amps on USB, which is fine, but there's a little diode on those that doesn't actually do 2 amps.
Yeah.
So if you see magic smoke,
Mm-hmm.
just switch a piece of wire around the diode that didn't need to be there to start with, and then
Yep.
you can do 2 amps from USB to your Neopixels. Don't ask me why.
So my biggest problem with this one, which only has 32 neopixels in it, is that at max brightness, it browns out the CPU. And I end up having nothing.
It's a
Yeah, yeah. And it's like, fine, I'll, reduce it. But these things here, I got really lucky. My brother-in-law found 100 12-volt power supplies on the side of the road. And so, so now we have power supplies coming out of our ears, and I don't have to care anymore. And the caveat to all of this is that I am very carefully ignoring any knowledge of electricity here. We even have the point where we've got 2 of these DC power adapters going into one board, one to power the motor and the other one to power the ESP board. And it feels bad. And I'm sure someone here can tell me why it's bad. This is another one. So this is the SP32 board, which I use only to be for touch elements, because the tree has these feathers on it, and the kids run around touching them, and all they do is change the color of the tree. So they change the DMX lights, which looks gorgeous at nighttime. And we got these linear motors. They sound awful. And they got converted into this Octopus that moves. And then they've also attached the touch controller to the chains. So you touch the chains, and the Octopus moves in a different way. And that then becomes part of the story that the actors can tell.
The SP32 board, was it a small one that meant to be compatible with the 8266?
Yes, yes.
So they took out a bunch of pins that you don't need.
They gave you 2 rows of pins instead of 1.
Oh, I see.
Oh, may as well, yeah.
That's nice.
So it's, so the inner pins are pin compatible with the WEMOS, and then the outer ones are the extra bits.
Okay.
And it's cheaper than the 8266 version, which I find embarrassing, but oh so convenient.
Nice.
And then these, 25 kilo servos become flowers, which underneath there's a board that lifts the sticks, and then the servos have an armature so that they open the flowers up, which again is one of those really simple little things you bodge together, but when you have people telling a story, it looks incredible. And then we have an RFID reader, NFC reader with a Raspberry Pi attached, because I've been too lazy to ESP that. And that becomes a tree stump with a reader in it. And the cup over there, when you put that on the reader, gives you, wait, maybe I can do this. Maybe. Gets you lightning. But then on top of that, because the set is a great big cloud, during the daytime, it rains. And the raining was just one of these boards with a relay on it, and everything else, the prop people just went out, bought the pieces and made it work. And so the biggest takeaway, I think, from what I've ended up being able to experience is that you can close your eyes, not worry about the details of how it works, or any of understanding most of electronics even, and you can get away with building something amazing. So long as you're willing to spend a little bit more. I mean, if you design something specifically to do that, would it cost more or less than $10 in the end?
Way more. The time.
Yeah, no, yeah, and I mean that's kind of sad, but it does mean that I have this thing that the prop builders will build into something else next time. And so, like the Woodford show ended up with a whole stack of things we had to build. Probably the biggest nasty thing was that we had to buy a big Ubiquiti mesh network, because otherwise this stuff is just not reliable enough. What else about it? Yes. This, on the other hand, is my nightmare. The director comes to me and says, we want to do this, and I'll spend weeks staring at different places I can buy things. And then on top of that, you've got to think about the fact it takes time to arrive, so in the end you order something and hope that it works. Funnily enough, the same thing's true of software. There are so many libraries that do the same thing. And so this is where the message is just pick something, use it. It probably will do most of what you need, unless you're running towards the capacity of the device. And that's why I kind of go, get something massive. And if you're in Mark's situation, go for something way bigger. I mean, Raspberry. But why would you want to use a screen? Yeah. Where am I? Yeah, is anybody interested? This is what the messages look like for all of these devices. They are really simple JSON packets. And I mean, I feel slightly weird about constructing JSON in an embedded processor and then throwing it over a network. But then, you know, I first played with embedded things in 1995, where it was build a bootloader, build an operating system, build a this, build that, all just to get a cart running around. It was literally, you know, this sort of thing. Spent the whole year doing it as a thesis, and now, you know, I can send an event. Oh, we got one more thing. And the control, as in Node-RED, will then send a reply to all of the devices to say, play the sound and make the lights go. This is actually my biggest problem. I was going to take so many photos, and instead I didn't. I was so busy enjoying the show. All right, and I don't know how we are for time, but we have questions. Does anybody have a question?
So, one quick question. How do the MQTs, your small devices, discover the server? Is it just statically assigned and hope for the best?
In most shows, I use DNS. Right here, I've hard-coded the IP, and I've set up a network, a Wi-Fi thing on my notebook and done some things. But as standard, boring, simple technology as possible, because I don't have time.
So is that a real question, Heat?
Hmm?
Is that a real question about Heat?
Yes, yes.
When I had Neopixels, I had 1500 on me, and it turns out they were not really warm. I mean, if you're not running them full bright at 40 amps,
Yeah.
you know, it's fine. And these RGB panels use even less. So the heat really, unless you turn them off
Yeah.
bright enough to blind the crap out of people at night.
That's cool. Because the first thing we built for our daughters caught on fire. And so we kind of went, maybe we should worry about that. And this here is an ESP8266. It was supposed to have a battery in it, but that didn't work out too well.
Are you sure you didn't have a short?
I think we did. Yeah, no, I think we had a short, but nonetheless, you know, you just go, this is an ESP board sitting inside some paper from a shredder that's then sitting inside plastic. So it just feels like it's asking for fire. It's well insulated. It could be warm inside. I don't know. And you know, if these things have temperature in them, maybe I could make it glow as it gets hotter, and you know.
They actually do.
Yeah.
You can get the temperature out of the process.
But is that a good? Anyway, yeah. You know.
Time.
Yeah. Excellent. Cool. Thank you very much.